What's up, my friends, and welcome in to the PHLY Phillies podcast, this emergency podcast here. Just myself today, Tyler Zulli, and I'm going to apologize in advance. A little under the weather here this evening, but I'm glad that you're going to join us. We do have some Phillies action finally, and this emergency podcast is brought to you by Indeed. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your job more visibility at Indeed.com/ALLCITY. Once again, that's Indeed.com/ALLCITY. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Yes, welcome into this emergency podcast, a little late night edition as the Phillies finally get back in the free agent column, if you will, as they make a move and bringing in Max Kepler on a one-year deal. It is a reported $10 million deal. Kepler will be 32 years old when the season begins. He'll turn 32 this upcoming February. Let's just jump right into it because we're not going to be here for too long on this conversation, but I'll give you my thoughts and then we'll kind of dive deeper into the numbers and we'll wrap this thing up with if this was a good move, if this was a bad move, this was an okay move, but I'll give you my thoughts right off the jump. Max Kepler is a guy that Jamie Lynch and I have talked a lot about this offseason. It was kind of one of those next tier down type of outfielders who the Phillies probably would have some interest in. A left-handed bat. I know that that's kind of a constant. That's a conversation piece for a lot of people. It's another left-handed bat. A guy who has had pop in the past, a guy who struggled to stay healthy, and a guy who struggled to stay consistent in 2023 or in 2024, excuse me. This was a guy that we figured would be on the Phillies' radar based on their monetary availability, based on the fact that they have made it pretty darn clear that they were not going to do what they were going to do what they could to stay under this next tax apron, because I believe the next tax threshold is the fourth tax threshold, and it gets taxed at over 100% on the dollar for every dollar that they go over. It seemed pretty clear that Dave Dombrowski, Sam Fold, the front office, Preston Mattingly, and John Middleton, of course, were going to do what they could to stay under this dollar amount. The Phillies needed another outfielder. The likelihood that they were going to sign a big-time free agent was pretty low. Obviously, I think the Juan Soto sweepstakes was not really ever a conversation piece, right? The Mets were always going to be the high bidder. The Yankees were going to be in the conversation. Teams like the Blue Jays and the Red Sox were going to be in the conversation. They seemed like teams that were willing to spend money. The Phillies were never going to be in on the conversation surrounding Juan Soto. So you take the next step down. Were they going to be in play for guys like Anthony Santander and Teoscar Hernandez? I always felt the answer to those two guys even was probably not. Teoscar Hernandez was a guy that I've talked about plenty that I was wrong on last season. I did not want Teoscar Hernandez heading into the 2024 season because of the fact that it was a guy with a high strikeout rate that was going to a team with a high strikeout rate. And while the power was undeniable, the defense wasn't particularly great. And I was proven wrong. Teoscar Hernandez had an excellent season. He was an all-star last year, north of 30 home runs, north of 90 RBI, a much better plate discipline for him. His chase rates went down. His strikeout rates went down. It was a much better year for Teoscar Hernandez as a whole. And because of it, I think he played himself out of the Phillies price point as well. So you kind of take the next step down. And the next logical step down for me was a guy like Jurickson Profar, who I assume is going to make more money than the Phillies were willing to spend now that we know what the Phillies gave Max Kepler on a one-year deal. Jim Salisbury brought this up a couple of weeks ago with us when he talked to us about the bullpen and how kind of the thought process behind the bullpen was potentially going to be more centered around one-year deals. Was the same to be said for the outfield depth? Was the same to be said for any type of platoon player or any type of even starter that the Phillies were to bring in? Maybe that's the case. And maybe that's why Max Kepler is a Philly today. We talked about Max Kepler a lot because his 2023 numbers were excellent. His years prior, 2021, 2019 specifically was his best year. He had 36 home runs. But his years prior were much better than his injury-marred season a year ago. He had a knee issue, patella tendon issue. He had a hip injury that caused him to miss, a decent amount of time in 2024. And I think the numbers never got back to what they were in 2023, probably due in part to the injuries The power was just simply not there. He had 8 home runs last year. He hit 24 in 2023. So Kepler was a guy that I thought was going to be on their radar, but I thought was going to be on their radar as a 4th outfielder. That I thought was going to be on their radar as a guy who could, in fact, platoon in left field with Brandon Marsh. And it felt to me like the platoon was going to be in left field and Johan Rojas was going to get an opportunity to play in center. There would be multiple days where Brandon Marsh played center as well. But my feel on it, my viewpoint on it was that it felt like there was going to be a platoon in left and Johan Rojas would get significant run in center. Max Kepler gets $10 million for a season. Now, you see what pitchers are going for. You see what the market is dictating. And guys are getting paid significant money. So $10 million is not a ton of money for somebody who could conceivably be a platoon plus type of player. The problem is, as we just brought up, the Phillies talked about the fact that they weren't going to really want to go over that luxury tax threshold. So you bring in Max Kepler on a $10 million deal. You've effectively told your fan base you're not bringing Jeff Hoffman back, and you're likely not bringing Carlos Estevez back either. So your bullpen is worse than it was a year ago, and your left field position is marginally better than it was a year ago with Austin Hayes and Brandon Marsh. I like Max Kepler. I think Max Kepler would have been a really fine 4th outfield piece, would have even been a platoon plus piece. The fact that they gave Max Kepler $10 million to me says that they're using Max Kepler. They have an eye for Max Kepler to be a starter on this team. Now, does that mean Brandon Marsh plays center field and it's Kepler in left and Marsh in center, especially against right-handed pitching? That's probably the case. What are you doing against left-handed pitching? Kepler's numbers are okay against lefties. They're better than Marsh's, but they're not particularly strong. And again, the numbers were better in 2023 than they were in 2024. And I think that had a lot to do in part with the injury. Let's go over some of those numbers. 2023, he slashed 260, 332, 484. He hit 24 home runs. He drove in 66. It was an 816 OPS. Flash forward to last year, or flash ahead to last year, the average goes down about 7 points. The OBP goes down 30 points. The slugging, it goes down over 100 points. He drops from 484 to 380. He hit only 8 home runs. He did still drive in 42 in a smaller sample size, but he only hit 8 home runs. The gaps power was sapped. The over-the-wall power was sapped clearly by the fact that he, basically had 25%, or 33% of the home runs that he hit a year prior. And the OPS dropped from the 816 that I mentioned in 2023 to a 682 in 2024. He barreled the ball 41 times in 2023. Now I'm going to inundate you with stats, and I'm sorry, but this is just to outline the difference of a player that Max Kepler was pre-injury last year and in 2023, and post-injury in 2024 that really did sap a lot of his power. 41 barrels in 2023. That was down to 18 in 2024. The percentage dropped from 12.2% to 6.2%. His hard hit rate dropped from almost 48% to 37%. His walk rates went down. His average exit velocity went down. And the number that stood out to me the most was the fact that he struggled with fastballs last year more than he did in most of his career, most of the seasons throughout his career. 2023 hit 288 against fastballs. He had a 13.2% whiff rate. He hit 17 of his 24 home runs off fastballs and had 64 hits off of the fastball in 2023. Now, that's all variations of fastball. It doesn't take into account, the different usage between a 4-seam, a 2-seam, the cutter, the sinker. But that's every variation of a fastball. He was pretty darn good against the fastball in 2023. 2024, 266. The average goes down about 20 points. The whiff rate goes up over 9 percentage points, up to 22%. He hit just 4 home runs off of fastballs, and he did have 51 hits. But again, the average was down, and because of the fact that the home runs were down and the extra base hit power was down, the slugging went down. The numbers across the board were down in 2024 compared to 2023. So the question is, can this guy bounce back? Can he bounce back to some semblance of the player that he was in 2023? The answer to that question, I don't know. I hope he can, but for $10 million, I don't know if that's I don't know if the answer is Max Kepler is an everyday left fielder. What the Phillies have told you, and what it seems to me, at least I should say, what the Phillies have told you, is that they are not going to invest in multi-year deals because they seem to believe in the young core that is getting closer and closer to coming up. With that being said, who is that? Is it Justin Crawford? Is it Aiden Miller? Is it Starlin Caba? They feel like they're comfortable with those guys being major league players, specifically Crawford, and then probably Miller after that. Caba seems to be, multiple years away still. But Crawford seems to me like the plan is he is going to continue to get fast-tracked up through the farm system as he has and succeeded at most levels, hit over 300 in single A. The double A numbers were good. I expect him to probably start the year in double A this year. And then, will he rise to triple A? Or, I don't know. Maybe he will start the year in triple A. That's just my opinion. But I think this tells you that the Phillies really have invested heavily in Justin Crawford specifically. Does this mean they make another move? I think the only way that they do that is via the trade market at this point. I think the Anthony Santanders are pretty much out at this conversation, at this point of the conversation. I think Teoscar Hernandez is probably out at this point. I think Jurickson Profar is probably out at this point. I would assume that their thought process is in order to bring anybody else in, they're going to have to make a trade. And it's going to have to be a trade that they value both monetarily, not just with the number, but with the contractual years and what works for them. And I see a lot of the comments in the chat, right? Like, you're not thrilled with this move. And I'm not going to try to convince you that you should be. I think Max Kepler would have been a really fine fourth outfielder, a really good bench bat who could be primed for a bounce back year should he be healthy. Jamie talks about it all the time. There's no bad one-year deals. And I tend to agree for the most part. This one specifically is questionable to me because of the monetary value. Now, maybe the market rates inflated across the board, and you're going to see some of these outfielders like an Alex Verdugo, like I'm blanking on the name, and I apologize. The Harrison Bader, the center fielder for the Mets last year. Maybe you're going to see those type of guys go for more money than we expected. Guys that are excellent defenders, light hitters, a little bit of upside at the plate, but not really. Maybe you see them go for more than what we expect. Or maybe you see them sign multi-year deals. That could certainly be plausible as well. But this is a questionable move as an everyday player. Now, they've not announced anything. I don't know if he's an everyday player, but I assume based on $10 million, he's going to be a platoon plus at minimum. And I think you'll see, again, especially against right-handed pitching, you'll see Marsh in center, you'll see Kepler in left. This has become a very left-handed heavy lineup, especially against right-handed pitching. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a very left-handed lineup. You're talking about Kepler. You're talking about Marsh. You're talking about Stott. Talking about Harper. This is a very left-handed hitting, and Schwarber, of course. It's a very left-handed heavy lineup, especially when righties are going to be on the mound. What do you do against the lefty? Do you allow Brandon Marsh to figure this out? And it's Brandon Marsh in left and Johan Rojas in center against the righty? That's my biggest question mark with this signing today. I don't want to inundate you with a ton of like percentiles and numbers, but those are the things that fascinate me when it comes to year by year basis. Max Kepler's chase rate was bad last year, or it was one of the worst of his career. And he was in the 34th percentile. I can't excuse that because I know a lot of people are frustrated with the high chase rates from many of the Phillies lineup from a year ago and from 2 years ago. You don't want to talk about the way Arizona ended. Understood. You talk about the way that the Mets series ended. Understood. The Phillies hit 186 against the Mets last year. People are going to be concerned about last year's chase rate. Prior to that, he's been excellent. His chase rates in each of the 3 seasons before that, 2023, the 75th percentile, 2022, the 80th percentile, 2021, the 93rd percentile. His chase rates have been really, really good up until last year. Can he bounce back? That seems to be the question mark that I continue to come back to. Does he bounce back, right? Does he bounce back from the injury? Does the power come back? Can he be an everyday left fielder? Does his chase rate go back to what it's been for a bulk of his career? There's a lot of question marks that surround this move. So if you're underwhelmed, if you're flat out not loving this move, I get it. I like the move if this were a definitive fourth piece, fourth outfield type of guy. I even could say I like the move if this is a platoon piece. My concern does become how many at-bats and how many games is Max Kepler playing? Because for $10 million, I think he's going to play a lot. We'll get you out of here on this. And thank you, everybody, for checking in with us today. I really appreciate it. Seth, Brian, Mopar, Lonnie, just going through the chat real quick just to say hello to everybody. Duran, Frank, Mike, Joe, Chris Slemmer, Chris Miller. Appreciate all of you guys for hanging out with us here late on this Thursday night. I hope we could hang out with each other and kind of talk through this a little bit. Let's just kind of go through all of the things that separated 2023 from 2024. Kepler's zone contact was better. We talked about his chase rates. They were better. His whiff rates were better. They were all better in 2023 than they were in 2024. He barreled the ball at a much higher rate in 2023 than he did in 2024. His hard hit percentage was in the 83rd percentile. His walk rate was in the 59th percentile, which, the OBP shows that, right? He was a 332 in 2023. He was down to a near 300 in 2024. It was at 302. His strikeout rate, he was in the 54th percentile. And you take it back to 2022, he was in the 88th percentile. All of those numbers went in the wrong direction this year, with the exception of his K rate. His K rate was a little bit better. He was in the 60th percentile, but his barrel rate went down. His hard hit rate went down. His walk rate went down. His chase rate went in the wrong direction. I guess you could say up. His chase rate went in the wrong direction. And then even if you look at the expected numbers, right? The nerd stats, the stuff that the computer generates, they're all down. The expected OBP, the expected, the ex-Wabacon, which no one knows what the heck that means because it's one of those really nerdy computer-generated stats. But like even the computer-generated Stanford nerd stats will tell you 2024 was not Max Kepler's best year. There's a reason the Twins didn't bring him back. He spent his entire 10-year career in Minnesota. There's a reason that they didn't bring him back. This is going to be a wait-and-see move. This could pan out. This could be one of those moves we look back on in June and we go, man, he's really worth $10 million. The power's back. He's hitting gaps to gaps. He's hitting lefties at a better rate than we expected. His power has come back against the fastball. He's jumping on his first pitch contact rate has been much better. Like this could be one of those moves where we go, hey man, great move, Dave Dombrowski. Well done. $10 million, 1-year deal. You got yourself a nice little bargain. My worry is the more he gets, the more playing time that Max Kepler gets, the more at-bats that he gets. I'm not so sure that that's going to be the case. It's going to be a wait-and-see play. And I hate to tell you that. There's nothing that I would like to tell you more than this is an excellent move or this is a bad move, because I think that this is a wait-and-see move. If I'm leaning towards one of the other, I think it's a good move with bad monetary value. Now, some of the other guys that were signed so far, not the Juan Soto deal, of course. Tyler O'Neill signed a 3-year deal. It was worth about $50 million in Baltimore. He has a player opt-out after 2025. So my question is, obviously, again, this comes back to the fact that the Phillies clearly did not want to spend or did not want to give out multi-year deals to guys that they were not ready to commit to. But if you take $50 million, and it's $49.5 million to be exact, it's about $16.5 million per season. You spent $10 million on Max Kepler for 1 year. Tyler O'Neill is not a guy that I love. I think he's often injured, but the numbers are undeniable when he plays, right? The power is there. His power played at Fenway. I think his power would play at Citizens Bank Park. So my question is, if you're willing to spend $10 million on Max Kepler, what's the extra 6.5 for Tyler O'Neill, with the exception of the conversation of the fourth tax threshold. Michael Conforto was never a piece of this conversation. They spent $10 million on a one-year deal. I almost assure you they would not have spent the 17 that the LA Dodgers spent to sign him. He slashed 237, 309, 450 in 2024. His numbers weren't exceptional either for the Giants. Now, again, maybe a cavernous ballpark. Maybe the numbers play a little bit better at Citizens Bank Park than they do at LA, or than they do at Oracle, or whatever they're calling the Giants Stadium nowadays. But I don't think they would have ever spent $17 million. The other one, and people are going to look at me like I'm crazy, because why would this guy sign with the Chicago White Sox if he has anything left to give or anything left to play? Mike Tauchman was an interesting one. He signed for less than $2 million on a one-year deal. Nothing about Mike Tauchman jumps out to you. Last year, he hit 248, but his OBP was significant. He didn't strike out a lot. He struck out just about 70 times in about 300 at-bats. Not a lot of pop, not a lot of extra base hit prowess, right? He only had 20 extra base hits of his 74 hits that he had. He wasn't even a full-time player over the last two seasons, really, with Chicago, after kind of really coming back onto the scene after playing in Korea in 2022. But the OBP is good. The slugging, of course, is down. He's about league average in OPS plus. But he would have been an interesting conversation piece for me if you were going to go with a player on the cheap. And the $2 million deal that he signed, or the $1.9 million deal that he signed, would have been an interesting move for me. With that being said, I think Kepler's upside is higher than Mike Tauchman. There's no doubt about it. But I don't know what the return on investment is going to be. So as we wrap things up, and again, appreciate everybody for joining us today. This is a wait-and-see move, as is Jordan Romano. Seems to kind of be the conversation piece that the Phillies are entertaining this offseason. It's a lot of, let's hope for the best type of moves. I still believe right now, even with the signing of Max Kepler, the fact that the two moves that they've made are Jordan Romano, who I like, but is coming off a pretty significant injury, and Max Kepler, who I like, who is coming off a pretty significant injury, who both signed one-year deals, who both, I think, are lower risk. What's the upside of the reward is the question mark. This team is not better than it was last year. I'm not sure it's on par with what it was last year. And I think the conversation of Jeff Hoffman is pretty much out of the realm of possibility, which makes me really sad, because I've been advocating for a Jeff Hoffman contract extension since probably May of this season. We'll talk more about it in further detail tomorrow. Philly with John Marks. It'll be me and Jamie Lynch. John's going to be out tomorrow, but me and Jamie will dive deeper into this, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. Anthony's going to have this conversation as well tomorrow on the Anthony Gargano Show. So thank you for everybody with hanging out with us, hanging out with me today. Hope to catch you tomorrow. By the way, we're at the Reading Terminal Market tomorrow beginning at 9 a.m. if you want to hang out with us there. Would love to see you. Would love to commiserate, if you will. But I would love to celebrate the holiday season with you guys as well. So thank you so much for joining in with us. And again, this emergency podcast is brought to you by Indeed. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your job more visible at Indeed.com/AllCity. Again, that's Indeed.com/AllCity. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire. You need Indeed. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. We will talk to you tomorrow beginning at 9 a.m. from the Reading Terminal Market. Philly signed Max Kepler to a one-year, $10 million deal. And my kind of thought process on this is we'll see. All right, we'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
We all silly like the mayor.